In recent weeks, the UK has been at the centre of a political storm caused by unexpected and controversial budget decisions. One of the main players in this process has been Rachel Reeves, the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, whose budget initiatives have attracted the attention not only of MPs, but also of the general public. Her proposals on taxes, housing costs and economic growth drew heavy criticism, leaving behind a wave of discontent that swept the country. Most Britons were shocked by the new initiatives, as even the most favourable forecast did not promise improvement in the coming years. Rachel Reeves, who took office as Chancellor just a few months ago, was seen by many as a politician capable of leading the country to economic prosperity. However, her recent proposals have been far from expected. Despite assurances that the UK would enter a growth phase, Reeves has faced accusations that she has failed to deliver on promises and has actually slowed the economy despite the government's best efforts. Her tax and housing policies have drawn criticism and discontent among politicians and ordinary citizens alike. The projections she presented in a recent parliamentary session raised a lot of questions and even outrage. One of the most striking moments was when Conservative MP Graham Stuart, out of the blue, took to the floor of Parliament and said that the government should sack Rachel Reeves immediately. The move came as a shock to everyone present, including members of the ruling party. Stuart harshly criticised the Chancellor's actions, noting that her promises of stability and economic growth have not only not been fulfilled, but have led to a tightening of the country's financial situation. He said the decision to raise taxes, which will affect ordinary workers, is proof of the government's incompetence in conducting economic policy. Stuart also criticised the housing cuts, arguing that the decision will leave thousands of people homeless, exacerbating the lack of affordable housing in the country. Stuart's words were so harsh that there was silence after he spoke. A host of MPs, including his fellow MPs, had not expected such a blunt and harsh criticism of Reeves. This was a real political event, as Stuart, as a representative of the ruling party, directly questioned the Chancellor's abilities and the very basis of her economic programme. This moment was an important signal for the entire UK political scene, as it marked a split within the party and a public recognition that many of the government's decisions were causing widespread public outcry. It should be noted that Graham Stuart and his supporters were justifiably pointing to the fact that in the face of global economic instability, the UK should be seeking economic growth rather than new taxes and cuts to social programmes. And despite all Reeves' assurances that her programme would be beneficial, the public continues to be confused. The economic measures that have been proposed are not justified at a time when the population is already facing rising costs of living and high unemployment. All of this only adds to the discontent of citizens and leads to protests. After this event, when Graham Stuart called for the immediate sacking of Rachel Reeves, the attention of the entire UK political scene focused on one question: what happens next? Will the government take responsibility for bad decisions, or will it continue to support the Chancellor despite his obvious blunders? Questions about how and where the economy is heading have become even more pressing, with public opinion increasingly inclined to change course and move towards more decisive and viable measures. In parallel, another political drama is unfolding that has captured the public's attention. Amidst the general discontent and political instability in Parliament, it is not only the dissatisfaction with the economic situation that is coming to the fore, but also the increasing attention on the personality of Rachel Reeves. A host of politicians, both in opposition and from her own party, have begun to express doubts about her ability to handle the post of Chancellor, leading to negotiations within the party. Many fear that these setbacks could undermine confidence in the Labour Party as a whole, with the opposition using this as a chance to strengthen their position ahead of future elections. Rachel Reeves has found herself at the centre of a violent political storm, and her future career depends on how she can respond to criticism and deal with the consequences of her decisions. Against the backdrop of this crisis in Parliament, British society continues to remain anxious and determined for change. The changes that Reeves has proposed do not meet the demands of the times, and the expectations of her performance only add to the pressure on the government. Time will tell what Rachel Reeves' political career will be. But one thing is certain: her actions have left a significant mark on British history, and the consequences of these decisions will long be debated in Parliament and beyond. 2. Following Graham Stuart's surprise speech in Parliament, when he called for the immediate sacking of Rachel Reeves, the political atmosphere in the UK became even more tense. Numerous debates and discussions about the event continued not only in parliamentary circles but also in the general public. While the country's politics and economy are at the centre of heated debates, it is beginning to be gradually realised that public discontent is not only about the government's performance, but also about the changes taking place in the country. Stewart, in blaming Reeves for economic blunders, voiced more than just criticism. He actually questioned the entire course of a government that he felt was failing to meet critical challenges. This moment became a symbol of growing discontent among not only the opposition, but also among members of the ruling party, who began to question the legitimacy of keeping the incumbent chancellor in office. Against the background of these political battles in the UK, another very curious, and as it turned out, very controversial issue related to a major construction project in one of the most picturesque parts of the country, the Lake District. The £2.5 million project to build an Islamic center in the Lake District has found itself in the midst of a public controversy. The construction, which was to be a major milestone in the development of local infrastructure, faced an unexpected obstacle. Local workers and suppliers refused to take part in the project. The construction, which was supposed to start as soon as possible, found itself frozen due to the refusal of local entrepreneurs and workers to participate in the project. This was a real challenge because the project was not just large and expensive, but was backed by strong financial and organizational support. While the government continued to state its commitment to support all projects that contribute to the development of the country, locally, residents began to actively voice their discontent. Interestingly, this resistance did not lead to mass protests or street actions. Instead, local workers, suppliers, and construction companies quietly but firmly withdrew from the project. They didn't go to rallies, carry placards, or create mass actions. Instead, they simply said, "We will not work on this project." This decision would not seem to have had the same effect if it were not for the widespread publicity, primarily due to the activity on the GB News TV channel, which devoted an entire program to the issue. Covering the project, the channel caused a storm of emotions, which quickly turned into discussions both online and in the media. All of this attracted the attention not only of local residents, but also of the entire country, raising an important question about how important decisions should be made in society and whose interests should ultimately come first. The main problem, according to many local residents, was that the project was not agreed upon by them. For many Lake District residents, the emergence of a huge Islamic center was an unexpected and not universally supported decision. Although the project was officially approved back in December 2022 and was presented as important for the development of the local community, for some the decision appeared to be essentially brought on from above. This was part of a wider debate about how large projects that impact local communities should take into account the views of those very communities. As it turned out, most local residents, while not opposed to the idea of an Islamic center, were concerned about the scale of the project and its impact on the architectural landscape and community atmosphere of the area. The problems that arose against the backdrop of the construction were not only related to social perception, but also to practical difficulties. Several construction suppliers refused to provide the materials, including concrete and stone, required for construction. This caused serious delays that made it difficult to start work. Moreover, construction depended on the supply of building materials, which was in danger of being disrupted. This brought the project into question, and the situation itself took on the dimensions of a political scandal. Some local government officials tried to minimize the situation by saying that the delays were insignificant, and that the project would still be completed on time. However, for many residents, this has come to symbolize a deeper problem, the problem of local interests and needs being ignored. It also drew attention to issues of local identity and the rights of citizens to voice their opinions on decisions that could affect their lives. In the end, although the project faced difficulties and uncertainties, representatives of the center tried to reassure the public by saying that problems with the supply of construction materials were temporary. However, the emergence of new challenges in the form of criticism of the project and accusations of disrespect for the local population continued to be at the center of discussions. People were increasingly concerned that local decisions were being made on the ground without taking into account the views of local people, leading to such confrontations. Instead of using traditional methods of protest, people opted for a quiet but firm refusal to participate in the project, emphasizing their position while sending a signal to the authorities that they do not intend to accept decisions imposed from above. Thus, although the Lake District Islamic Center project is only part of a larger political picture, it becomes a prime example of how important community decisions can be met with resistance. This is not just a project, but an example of how the government must consider citizen opinion before introducing large-scale and meaningful change. Local resistance to this project also reflects a broader trend in society, where people are beginning to express their position quietly but confidently, without loud statements, simply by refusing to participate in something they feel does not take their interests into account. In recent weeks, the topic of excessive public spending has become a hotly debated issue in the UK, sparking a flurry of outrage among ordinary Britons who are increasingly feeling the effects of rising living costs and economic instability. At the centre of this discussion was Foreign Secretary David Lammy, whose spending on private flights outrageously jumped to more than £1 million in 3 months. When details of his trips on luxury private jets were released, the public reacted with fury, pointing out that such spending was a clear show of disrespect for taxpayers. The most expensive of Lammy's trips, a visit to India for trade talks, cost more than £500,000, a real shock to Britons who have to contend with rising prices for goods and services. These costs have become even harder to take amidst numerous statements from politicians that the public finances need to be more tightly controlled. Many believe that the government should set an example of austerity and responsibility rather than throwing taxpayers' money around. This spending contrasts particularly strongly with the government's efforts to cut spending and increase taxes for ordinary people. One of the most high-profile statements on the subject was Chancellor Rachel Reeves' proposal to introduce new taxes, which her opponents claim will hit the most vulnerable hardest. At a time when ordinary citizens are increasingly forced to save money on their most basic needs, such excessive spending by senior politicians is becoming a real offense. It also undermines the credibility of the government, which critics say is failing to fulfill its obligations to the people. Against the backdrop of the Lammy scandal, the issue of double standards in politics and spending on high office has once again been at the centre of public discussion. While ministers and MPs enjoy privileges whose expenditures cause outrage, ordinary citizens feel the consequences of the government's economic policy of cutting social programs and raising taxes. When such contradictions become evident, it causes growing discontent and a sense of social injustice that could eventually play a key role in the upcoming elections. The imbalance in resource allocation evident in such a situation remains an important topic of discussion, and citizens' reactions to these developments only add to the political heat. Amidst the increasingly complex situation of growing citizen discontent, another controversial story was also at the centre of the discussion. Public attention was drawn to how one Labour Party MP, Owatemi, found herself at the centre of a scandal over the use of public funds to pay rent for her dog. Owatemi, who represents Coventry in the parliamentary elections, was accused of using funds meant to cover living expenses in London to offset the costs associated with keeping her pet. The dog's owner, who has been active in showing off her dog on social media, has applied for £500 to cover these expenses, which has also sparked a storm of outrage. This was a prime example of how public perception of taxpayer spending can easily lead to a public outburst, especially in the face of growing discontent. The outrage arose not only because of the situation itself, but also because such spending is set against the broader context of a worsening economic situation for citizens. When millions of people are struggling with the rising costs of everyday necessities, such stories seem particularly defiant. Moreover, after it was revealed that Owatemi had applied for dog expense reimbursement shortly after the 2024 election, it began to look in the public mind like another attempt by politicians to use their positions for personal gain. While some of Owatemi's defenders argued that this was a standard case of pet fees being charged extra in London, this failed to appease those who saw the situation as yet another example of double standards. The story also reminded the public of larger expenses scandals from earlier, where MPs have tried to get reimbursed for things like pet food or even luxury items. There was a surge of discontent and outrage as these events were reminiscent of the 2009 scandal, when many questionable expenses were uncovered, including filing for pet food reimbursements and other unethical expenses. For many Britons, these stories were further evidence that there is a system in politics that allows the rich and powerful to exploit the system for their own benefit. Over time, despite the efforts of the government and some defenders of politicians, the situation of spending on pets and private jets has become emblematic of a wider problem. It shows how unfairness in spending can undermine trust in government and cause public revolt. Many Britons are beginning to ask, how long will they tolerate inequality when politicians, who receive huge salaries and privileges, do not show proper accountability for public money? A host of critical voices point out that such situations undermine not only trust in public institutions, but also in the very idea of public service, where every citizen should feel that their interests are protected and taxes are spent wisely. So with all these discussions and grievances, it can be said that the situation with Lammy, Ovat and other expenses scandals has brought British society to the brink. The question of how far these political games will go is becoming more and more relevant, because not only future political stability, but also citizens' trust in the system as a whole depends on it. When citizens begin to see politics as a tool for personal gain, such crises inevitably lead to consequences that go far beyond specific scandals.